Good morning. We are looking at the Wednesday morning before Christmas coming up here. So Saturday will be a celebration of the birth of our Lord and the incarnation, and also a time where we at Communion Life Fellowship will be having a communion breakfast. So if you're interested in being a part of that and you're listening to this, you can contact the church and give you directions to where we're meeting in one of the homes of the church. Of course, if you're part of the body, you already know this, and we'll be looking forward to it. It's a wonderful way to start the Christmas celebrations for that day. But we're going to continue in our walk through the book of Acts. And we're beginning in Acts number 17. And I'm going to read the first 9 verses. So Paul and Silas have been in Philippi. They wound up in jail for the proclamation of the gospel, and more specifically because they cast a demon of fortune telling out of a young slave girl that lost money for her owners, her masters. And they have been brought out of prison now. The Philippian jailer and his whole household has come to the Lord. There's a church been planted in Philippi, and they have moved on now to the city of Thessalonica. Let me begin reading. Now, when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. And Paul went in, as was his custom, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead, and saying, "This Jesus whom I proclaim to you is the Christ." And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a great many of the devout Greeks and not a few of the leading women. But the Jews were jealous, and taking some wicked men of the rabble, they formed a mob, set the city in an uproar, and attacked the house of Jason, seeking to bring them out to the crowd. And when they could not find them, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city authorities, shouting, "These men who have turned the world upside down have come here also, and Jason has received them. And they are all acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus." And the people and the city authorities were disturbed when they heard these things. And when they had taken money as a security from Jason and the rest, they let them go. So now we have Paul and Silas moving on to another city. In Philippi, there was no synagogue of the Jews, which meant there wasn't enough of a Jewish community to be able to support a synagogue. There were a group of women who met at the river, God-fearing women, of whom Paul comes in contact with initially, and Lydia is part of those, and we went through all that. And others then began to be saved, including eventually the jailer in Philippi. And so as they leave Philippi and move on, and they settle down in Thessalonica, this community, this city has a community of Jews that was large enough to have a synagogue and to have an impact in the city, as we'll see in the story. They were sufficiently connected enough to be able to actually cause some trouble for Paul and Silas as time goes on. But these 2 cities, both Roman colonies, have a reaction to the good news of Jesus Christ. There are some the differences. One, as I said, one has a synagogue, one doesn't. The persecution that Paul and Silas experienced in Philippi was because of a loss of money. It was because of greed. When they cast a demon out of a servant girl, and a demon that would be telling them how the future and how to use that to their advantage to make money. Where in Thessalonica, it is jealousy of the Jews that's going to cause the problem. So one was a Gentile, if you will, secular, idolatrous group of people who had lost money. A bunch of businessmen that didn't like their proceeds going down. The other was a religious, God-fearing, in their minds, I'm sure, synagogue of Jews, of who it turns out that a number of them, and I would assume possibly leaders, become upset. Because as Paul proclaims the good news of Jesus Christ, 3 Sabbaths in a row, so this was almost a month worth of preaching, many of the Jews begin to follow him, and of the God-fearing Gentiles of the city and the leading women of the city. Now, leading women were important in these cities. They didn't hold positions of authority, but they hold strong positions of influence. And so as they began to hear the gospel and believe on Jesus Christ and become part of the church, the body of Jesus Christ, the Jews of the synagogue begin to be jealous. And in order to cause trouble, they go to rabble-rousers. They go to people who were troublemakers, criminals, if you will, of the city. And they stir them up to come against Paul and Silas. And both cities, the troublemakers, take it to the governing authorities, the magistrates of the city, and make an accusation against Paul and Silas. Not an accusation that is accurate to what they were doing in the sense of proclaiming the gospel, but an accusation of the trouble that they were causing within the city. So in one case, they were, in Philippi, they were stirring up and causing trouble, and they told lies about them that were eventually investigated. And the day after they were thrown into prison, they're let out by the magistrates, because I believe they investigated and found out they really hadn't done what was being accused. Now in Thessalonica, the accusation is that they are coming against Caesar as king by proclaiming another king. And one of the things you don't see in Paul's preaching in the New Testament is an attack against Rome and against Caesar. You also see this in Jesus and his proclamation. When they came to him with some questions about taxes, he says, give to Caesar what is due Caesar and give to God what is God's. The gospel of Jesus Christ doesn't oppose the secular authorities, because they would see that all authority is from God and he is the highest authority. But they proclaim that Jesus Christ is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and they worship him as king. Now, the trouble that was going on in Thessalonica had nothing to do really with Caesar, but it had to do with Jews who would not have taken Caesar to be their king anyhow, being jealous of people leaving their faith in the synagogue, and they're following after the Jewish leaders and following after Paul and Silas in the proclamation of Jesus Christ. Now, you and I need to learn from this. because as we live out the gospel, as we share the gospel with word, but even more importantly, with word and deed, as we walk it out, not just speak it, because words are one thing, but we need to follow them up with a living of the gospel, a living and expressing of the love of God the Father for a lost and sinful world. As we do that, and as we proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord of Lords and King of Kings, if we proclaim that Jesus Christ came and died on the cross, that he might take the wrath of God for sin upon himself, that those who have faith in him can be forgiven from their sin and become children of God. As we proclaim this message, there will be a blowback. There will be, as we see over and over through the book of Acts, persecution that will come down in the church. But it won't come down necessarily because of the message we preach, at least not directly, and it won't be come down on us because we live a godly, sharing, loving life. It'll be come down because what we do and what we share will be striking at the roots of the life of the world. Because the life of the world is rooted in sin. And when you destroy the power of sin and death through the gospel of Jesus Christ, the authorities of the power of sin and death will strike back. And that is where our persecution comes from. The good part we need to know is that it doesn't necessarily come from people as people. They are lost sinners, slaves of sin and death. And our proclamation of the gospel that stirs them up to persecute is stirring up and striking at the spiritual powers and authorities that control these people's lives. And therefore, we should never become upset with people, because as it says in the book of Corinthians, we don't wage war against people. We wage war against the authorities in heavenly places. And those two need to be, we see that here demonstrated in these two outreaches in Philippi and Thessalonica. And when we know that, then we will not become angry and we will not become absorbed in a battle of any kind with people. But we'll keep that battle in the realm of the Spirit and tearing down strongholds and everything that is raised up against the knowledge of God in our lives personally and in the life of the church and in the culture that is around us. And so even though we need to take stands here and there in our convictions and what we believe, we need to see that our real battle is against these spiritual forces of wickedness. And that our fighting should not be in the realm of the world, but in the realm of the Spirit. We need to love those that are in the world, love those that oppose us, love those that persecute us, because they are blind slaves of sin and death, and they need deliverance that comes through the proclamation of Jesus Christ as King of Kings. And we find that case here. Now, what's going to happen here and what happens towards the end is they didn't find Paul and Silas this time. If they would have, they probably would have thrown them in prison in Thessalonica again. But instead, they take people in the church that were believers and followers of the message of the gospel, and they bring them before the governing authorities, and they find them money as a security. And their goal is to follow up on this some more and investigate it and find out what really is going on. Are these men really preaching against Caesar the king, or are they declaring their true king, Jesus Christ, as Lord of Lords and King of Kings? And we'll continue on with that as Paul and Silas have to leave Thessalonica for their own health and the good of the church, so that it can grow in peace and be left alone, and move on to the city of Berea. And so we'll see that next Wednesday after our holiday celebrations this weekend for the birth of Jesus Christ. So I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you then. Bye.